Islam Makhachev, Dana White, and even Khabib have all come out to talk about a potential Ilia Topuria super fight after Islam Makhachev either wins or loses against Jack Della Maddalena, because no matter what, the fight could still happen. The fight was supposed to happen maybe in June. There was a lot of hype around the fight potentially happening, but Islam decided to move up to 170. Ilia moved up to lightweight, so they're fighting now in two different weight classes. But who's to say Islam, I guess, can't go back down, or Ilia's even said that he'd go up to welterweight, moving up 35 plus pounds, which I just think would be way too much at that point, to be honest. But I don't know. I have always kind of believed that we'll never see this fight, but seeing that there's all this talk around it, I mean, maybe. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. Why would they be talking about it if there is zero interest in getting this fight done? Okay, so first, Islam Makhachev was asked about this by Aiden Ross on his stream, and asked about, Ilia Topuria, because some people have said, oh, Islam ducked. I think this is probably 2% of the MMA fan base, if we're going to be honest, but probably some people out there genuinely are saying, oh yeah, Islam ducked. Personally, I think the UFC just didn't want Islam to fight Ilia, because one of them lose and the UFC is going to lose a star, right? It's better to have two stars, Ilia Topuria a star, Islam a star, instead of just knocking one off. So I think the UFC just wanted to play it safe, and I think that's why we never actually got to see the fight. But here, Islam does say he is down, and, I guess kind of refutes the ducking stuff.
I know you don't duck anything. I know you're down to fight anybody. So why didn't Ilia and you happen ever? Or do you think it'll ever happen, eventually? Or if it does, whatever?
It can happen. Easy, maybe biggest fight.
I think it'll be the biggest fight.
Biggest fight, everybody know, and I also want. And I think next year is the best time.
No surprise there. I don't really think that Islam was the cause of it. There was a point in time where Islam did say beating Ilia wouldn't really do much for his career, but I think, come on now, Ilia's knocked out Oliveira in the first round, beat Oliveira more impressively than Islam beat Oliveira, may I add. And yeah, I think now he actually has something to challenge. There is more credibility to Ilia, and I'm more interested in the Islam match, by the way, because maybe 6 months ago I would have said, oh, I think that's a bad idea for Ilia. I think Islam would win. Now I'm not so sure, especially if Islam goes back down after, fighting at welterweight. I don't know. It also depends too. Who knows? Maybe Islam's going to get knocked out this week, and you really don't know. But Dana White was also asked about it in an interview, and this was interesting to see his response, because like I said, yeah, I'm not surprised to see Islam want the fight, but Dana White too. I mean, Dana White I thought was the guy stopping the fight in the first place, but this is a big moneymaker fight. But like I said, even though this is a big moneymaker fight, and this would probably generate a lot of revenue, and also just be a big spectacle overall, it's going to be a big spectacle for the UFC to put on. I do agree with all of that. However, I think long-term, they'd rather two, stars as champion that could keep headlining pay-per-views. We've talked about how the UFC has fallen off business side, and that really they just care more about having, numerous events, like having events at different locations, rather than focusing on, hey, let's have the best fights, let's have the greatest events. That's at least my opinion. I think it's pretty clear as day, though, seeing their business model. They don't care about the venues. They just care about, getting paid from the venues. They don't actually care about the fights. They care about, hey, let's deliver a decent amount of cards so we can get paid a site fee and move on with our day. That's at least what I think of the UFC. But Dana White showed some interest in making this fight. Let's see what he had to say.
Now, what about Topuria and Islam? Could that fight happen?
Yep. That can happen too.
I'd like to see that fight.
I think everybody wants to see that fight, including Topuria and Islam. So.
And yeah, I mean, Dana White, I would have been more confident if he was like, look, I really want to see this fight. He says, yeah, we know this. Islam wants the fight. Ilia wants the fight. And he's like, that would be a massive super fight. So why not? But Dana White kind of says this about every fight. So we kind of got to take this with a grain of salt here. I mean, there's a lot of big ifs. If Islam beats JDM this weekend, I highly doubt the fight's going to happen. What is he going to do? Go back to lightweight? What is he going to, abandon the welterweight belt for no reason and go back down to lightweight? I doubt that. Especially he's already calling out Kamaru Usman for his next fight. There's a small chance, because like I said, I did make a prediction video where I predicted Jack Della Maddalena and Islam, and while I'm on the fence, I'm leaning towards Jack Della Maddalena winning the fight, because I just think moving up in weight is such a huge task for Islam, and he doesn't exactly have such a long time to do it. He didn't have such a long time to prepare. Literally a few months ago, he was in talks to fight Ilia Topuria. Back in June, he was in talks to defend the lightweight title. Now he's moving up a totally different weight class. I'm not so convinced. And I'm not also convinced that Dana White is going to want to put on this fight. I don't know. I seeing him respond that way did give me a little bit of hope. But this person does give me a lot of hope, Khabib, because Khabib does hold a lot of power. Recently, I saw Islam Makhachev even say that he would retire if Khabib said to retire at one point. So, I mean, Khabib clearly has a lot of influence over Islam, and maybe could say, hey, you should fight Ilia. This is a big fight for you, monetarily, also legacy-wise. And, maybe probably Khabib looks at it as an easy fight. I mean, Ilia is a smaller guy than Islam, so it probably would. Ilia is a smaller fighter than Islam, so on paper, Ilia should lose the fight, but I don't know if that's the case because Ilia does hit really hard. He is really well-rounded. I'm not sure, but we'll get into my prediction and my breakdown on that in a second. Here's what Khabib had to say.
There's the John Jones and the Alex Bahia fight. Everyone keeps talking about that being the biggest fight. I heard Joe Rogan talking about it's the biggest fight you could possibly make. But then there's also people that say the Ilia Topuria and the Islam fight is the biggest fight you can make.
I think right now, I think Topuria Islam can be biggest fight, not John Jones and Pereira.
Still a big fight, but not at the level.
It's still big fight, but not on that level.
No.
I don't know what would be the biggest fight. I think right now we would say John Jones, Alex Pereira, but I'm going to be honest, John Jones versus Alex Pereira doesn't get any bigger than it is right now. Ilia versus Islam will get bigger as there's more press, as there's more events. A press conference will help this thing. If they did a face-to-face, which, we can't even guarantee that they will do, but if they did something like that or there's just more promotion, maybe that fight could be bigger. I could see that fight growing with a lot more promotion if there's the right spotlight on it. But John Jones and Alex Pereira pretty much sells itself. It is that great of a fight. It is just simple. You have Alex Pereira, who is an amazing kickboxer, who could pose a lot of damage to John Jones going up to heavyweight. John Jones, literally just being one of the greatest of all time. But more on Islam versus Ilia. Khabib approved of the fight, and I think that is a huge sign because there was a talk that the Ilia fight, it was disrespectful to fight a guy that's smaller, this and that. Islam seemed to be cocky. Islam's team seemed to be cocky. It seems maybe now they don't like the trash talk from Ilia. Ilia's been talking a lot of trash. Maybe they're actually down to fight. Now, my question is this actually legitimate? Is there a legit way that this fight happens? Well, obviously, first we got to look at this weekend. There is a possibility Islam loses this weekend, and I think that is probably the strongest possibility because my advice for Islam, I think, is stay at the weight. Even if he loses, I think it's better, get used to the welterweight division, build into it a little bit. Don't go back and forth, which kind of brings me to my main point, I should just say, which is this makes me worry for Islam even more. The fact that we're even flirting with this fight shows maybe that they aren't 100,000% committed to this welterweight move. Maybe it shows, that they just, kept on the extra weight that they usually cut from other training camps, meaning that you're not 100% in shape. He isn't in the best shape possible because he is keeping more weight on, and I don't think that's going to translate into a better performance. I think that's going to translate into getting tired more. And did Islam build the weight properly? I think if he did, I think he would be more invested and more like, nah, I'm not going to fight Ilia unless he fights me at 170. Granted, no one has confirmed what weight class this would be. I guess Islam could be assuming, Ilia is being serious and going at 170, but I think realistically, there's no chance Ilia is going to fight Islam at 170 pounds. That is way too big of an advantage for Islam. I think the fight makes sense at 155 if you're going to even do it, which, like I said, I don't even know if it's even worth doing at this point. Bringing Islam down, I think you missed your chance in June. It was the perfect opportunity. That was the time to make the fight. You know what I mean? You could have had a massive super event. And once again, like I said, they didn't do it. Why? Because they would rather have two big stars that they can bring around to different venues around the world, that they can bring to, New York City, that they can bring to Las Vegas and bring to these big destinations that can sell out venues. They'd rather that than have massive events. And that's why we're in this situation. Let's not kid ourselves. And now, I don't know. I think the UFC are kind of having some regret. I think the UFC might be saying, and not even just the UFC, also Islam Makhachev maybe as well, because Ilia was definitely down. Ilia was 1,000% down. In Islam, I'm not saying he was down because he was scared, but I think more he was giving into the UFC's demands and things like that. And I wonder if there's any regret in that situation, if there's any, hey, maybe this fight could have been bigger. Maybe, Ilia Topuria could have been to a Conor McGregor status. I'm not saying that necessarily I believe that, but I'm just saying these big fights are going to get him closer and closer to that. And does the fight actually happen at this point? I doubt it. I really do doubt it. I don't think the fight could legitimately happen. It does seem positive. It does seem like Dana White does want a fight to happen. Maybe he's warmed up to the idea than he was a few months ago. Islam definitely seems way more warmed up to it than he was in the beginning of the year. Ilia Topuria, we know, is on board. The problem is the weight. And I don't know. I don't really think that Islam should be going back and forth. I don't think we're going to be seeing the best Islam Makhachev. And at the end of the day, if we see Ilia versus Islam, I want to see them both at 100%. And that was why I didn't really want to see it back way before. I was okay with it. I did want to see it back in June, but around January time, before Islam even fought Renato Moicano, I wasn't a huge fan because I wasn't convinced Ilia was that big of a lightweight. And I said, look, I don't want to see it if both guys aren't 100%. Now we're seeing, look, Ilia clearly is a big lightweight. He clearly was way too big for the weight class. He has a lot of hype around him, and I think that this is his opportunity. Ilia could beat Islam, and I think it could be a great fight because Ilia, he has dangerous knockout power. It really just takes one punch, and I talked about in my last video that, look, Islam, I'm not saying he has a terrible chin, but he has gotten dropped before. He has shown holes in his game a little bit in the striking. He doesn't have terrible striking by any means. Like I said, I've actually praised him in the past, and I think his striking is actually pretty underrated, in all honesty, because he does have some good moments, especially his boxing, and specifically can be underrated. A lot of his counters are pretty good. So I'm not here to 100% shit on him, but let's be honest, Ilia Topuria hits like crazy. I don't think that Islam's going to be comfortable in the pocket because he knows the danger coming at him. So he's going to be standing on the outside. And if Ilia is, blitzing him, getting Islam going backwards, can Islam actually land those takedowns without, and mixing in, keep in mind, Ilia's good on the ground himself. He's strong. He has good jiu-jitsu. So does that mean that Islam could win? I don't know. I'm kind of convincing myself that maybe even at lightweight, Ilia wins, but I don't think we're going to see the fight. The UFC, I think it's much better financially for them to just have them separate, because like I said, two big stars better than one. And I mean, just the weight wise, it's going to be a big problem, and we're not going to see Islam at 100%. So what's the point of even making the fight, guys? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Check out my last video where, like I said, I predicted UFC 322's main event, and let me know what other videos you guys want to see me make. You guys are the best fan base in MMA. Hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one.